they naturally in the body. Now by really you eat one of the and it's a simple or stop and of us are portraying the area. It's around for being that exists through you we to humans in the world is really to is that you food you this is the